Hi, this is Dr. John Bergsma from the St. Paul Center and from Franciscan University of Steubenville, and we are reflecting today on the readings for the Friday of the fourth week of Lent. And as we move along in Lent, and we're getting late into Lent at this point, and Passion Sunday or Palm Sunday is approaching quickly, the liturgy, more precisely, we could say the lectionary, turns increasingly to the Gospel of John and indeed to passages of John that show the conflict that gradually arises between Jesus and the Judeans as his suffering and his passion approaches. And that's certainly the case in these readings as the Gospel is from John 7, an incident of some serious conflict between our Lord and the Judeans. And our first reading from Wisdom is an Old Testament anticipation of this conflict between Jesus and his persecutors. We read in Wisdom 2, "The wicked said among themselves, thinking not aright, let us beset the just one, because he is obnoxious to us. He sets himself against our doings, reproaches us for transgressions of the law, and charges us with violations of our training." And so it goes. And when we read that passage from Wisdom 2, it sounds very much like the accusations that are hurled against Jesus during his trial and even during his crucifixion. This is a special passage to me because I grew up without it in my Bible, being a Protestant pastor, and only read it after my conversion to Catholicism, and was floored, so to speak, by how prophetic this passage of wisdom was, and how prescient, how anticipatory it was in terms of describing the situation of our Lord on the cross. But it also describes a situation that many of us encounter, although maybe not to this degree of severity. But this passage describes how the good person is typically persecuted because the example of his life is despised and rejected by those around him, because the contrast between the lifestyle of the good person sets in great relief the wickedness of the wicked. And, you know, spiritually, what we derive from this is a reminder of the fact that if we, as followers of Jesus Christ, are seeking peace and serenity in our lives, I'm sorry, we are not going to receive it. This is the message also of the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And the question arises, why are we persecuted for righteousness' sake? When I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, I always had this vision that if I'm just a nice person, everyone will like me. And I think that's a desire that many of us have. We want to be nice, we want to be kind, and we want everyone to like us for our niceness and our kindness, etc. But it's unavoidable that we're going to encounter persecution if we follow the way of holiness. Why is this? Well, just to give an example, say that you want to be in favor of something that sounds completely innocuous. Who can be against babies, right? So yeah, let's let babies live, right? I mean, how can anyone be against that, right? I think babies should live. I don't think that we should kill babies. You know, a century ago, that would be, you know, almost a platitude. How could anyone be for killing babies? So I just like babies are cute. They're babies sweet. I think they should be allowed to live. You think that something like that would receive universal approval? But if you make that claim that babies should be allowed to live in online or in certain you know, public situations, look at the the rejection that comes. Look at the insults that are hurled at you. You know, you're a misogynist. What does that mean? Does that mean I massage people? No, that means you're a woman hater, right? You're a what? You hate women. You know, the reason that you think babies should live is because deep down inside of you, you are a woman hater. You know, so that kind of thing. It points out that if we are seeking peace by following Christ, uh, an external peace. And if we're seeking to be liked by society, this is not going to be fulfilled, because the very act of following the way of holiness um, sets out in stark relief the unholiness of those around us. And guess what? People resent that. It's like, you know, the one kid in the class who actually did his homework and makes everybody else look bad, right? So you hate that nerd, right? So the, the way of holiness is going to, this is the point, it will inescapably lead to persecution, and we need to accept that. And that's why Jesus tells us, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. That is actually the gospel, Luke 9:23. So the first reading reminds us about that. And then the gospel reading is an example where Jesus is in Judea. He's in Jerusalem at the Feast of the Tabernacles, and he's speaking openly, and some of the inhabitants of Jerusalem say, is not this the one they are trying to kill? You know, Jesus is quintessentially the righteous man who provokes opposition from the first reading. And they say, look, he is speaking openly, and they say nothing to him. Could the authorities have realized that he is the Christ? But we know where he is from. When the Christ comes, no one will know where he is from. And this is a wonderful example of what we call Johannine irony. Irony is a favorite feature of John the Apostle when he writes his gospel, and he frequently recounts the characters in his narration of Jesus' life, saying things that are highly ironic. And this is certainly a case. They say, we know where Jesus is from. Do they really know where he's from? Well, in the situation here, they think he's from Galilee. They think they know where he's from. He's a Galilean. Actually, they're wrong, because they haven't read Matthew or Luke, and they don't know that Jesus is actually from Judea. He's actually was born in Bethlehem. See, being born of Bethlehem from the line of David, that makes you as Jewish as you can be. That's like being, your ancestors were from the Mayflower, right? And you live in Peoria. I mean, you don't get any more American than that. You know, you live in the heartland where they grow corn, and George Washington is in, and Betsy Ross are in your ancestry. You know, so Jesus was from the line of David. He's from Bethlehem. He's from Judea. He is as Jewish as you get, red-blooded, apple pie, Chevrolet. He's so Jewish you can't believe it. And they think he's from Galilee, which is a territory, you know, that was associated with the Gentiles. So they think they know where he's from, but they're wrong. They think he's from Galilee. He's actually from Judea. But then there's another sense, and this is another thing that John likes to do. He's got layers of meaning, right? So there's all these multiple layers of meaning, like a big chord, like a big C7th major chord. It's not just one layer of meaning, but many stacked on top of each other. So they think they know where he's from. They think he's from Galilee, but they really don't know where he's from. And that's ironic, because the next thing they say is, when the Christ comes, no one will know where he is from. And that's actually true. They don't know where he's from. So ironically, he's the Messiah. You know, you got that going. But then there's this different layer. Not only do they not know where he's from geographically, but they don't know where he's from spiritually. They don't realize that he's from the Father, that he's come down from heaven, that his true origins are heavenly and not earthly. And so there's that layer of meaning. They don't realize that he's from heaven. And so when the Christ comes, no one will know where he is from. Well, that's so paradoxical. That's so ironic. they really don't know where he's from. And so his credentials as the Christ are validated, because when the Christ comes, no one will know where he's from. They don't know where, and we realize that as the reader, we realize that nobody in the story really knows where Jesus is from, and we get it, but they don't. And that's what we call literary irony, where you realize something that the characters in the story don't. But having said all that, do we really know who Jesus is? I mean, that's the spiritual message of this gospel. We think that we know who Jesus is. We think that we can put Jesus in a box. We think that, well, Jesus is like this and he's like that. And we have a certain kind of cultural notions of our Lord. But actually, Jesus is always far beyond our expectations. Actually, Jesus is much more demanding, much, I'm getting myself at a loss for words to describe what cannot be described in words. But Jesus is always beyond our concepts. He's always more than we think he is. And as we move on in Lent, what we could really spend our time in prayer on this Friday doing is praying for Jesus to help us to understand him better. If there are any little pigeonholes that we have placed Christ in, and one of the ways that this works out is we will give Jesus lordship over part of our life, but then other parts of our life we don't want him to interfere with. We reserve little pleasures, little sins where we don't want Jesus to be Lord over. And so we say, well, we're going to constrain Jesus to just these areas and not those areas. But maybe we could spend this Friday, in prayer, asking Jesus, are there areas where I don't realize where you're from? Are there areas in my life where I have not acknowledged your lordship? Have I unwittingly put you into a box and said that you are safe and I have understood you and I've placed you over here? And are there other areas of my spirit where I have not realized that actually you're Lord over those areas as well? Let's spend some time in prayer this Friday, asking Jesus to reveal to us all that he is, and expand our minds and expand our hearts to understand him better, that he is Lord, that he is God, that he is creator, that he is our origin and he is our end. Let's meditate on that. The people in John 7 thought they knew who Jesus was and didn't. God forbid that should be true of us as well.